On April 28, 2025, as Canadians went to the polls for their crucial federal election, U.S. President Donald Trump stirred a political storm with a controversial statement. In a post on Truth Social, Trump boldly suggested that Canada should become the 51st state of the United States. This incendiary comment didn't just spark outrage, it ignited a national debate about Canada's sovereignty and its place on the world stage. Trump claimed that joining the U.S. would bring economic advantages for Canada, including tax cuts and the elimination of tariffs. He went further, describing the U.S.-Canada border as artificial, and floated the idea of a borderless, united North America. The timing could not have been worse. With Canada's election taking place on the same day, the remarks were perceived by many as an attempt to influence the outcome of the vote, casting doubt on Canada's right to make its own decisions. In the wake of Trump's taunt, Canadian politicians from all parties quickly denounced the comments, emphasizing that the future of Canada should be decided by Canadians, not by a foreign power. As the election unfolded, Trump's words became a flashpoint for growing nationalist sentiment, sparking a surge in voter turnout and a renewed focus on the importance of Canadian independence. Tonight, we dive deeper into the political fallout from Trump's intervention, how it has impacted the election, and the future of U.S.-Canada relations. The uproar began when President Donald Trump posted his comments on Truth Social, an unfiltered social media platform, suggesting that Canada should become the 51st state of the United States. Imagine no tariffs, tax cuts, and a stronger economy for all, Trump tweeted, presenting his proposal as a win-win scenario for Canada. His words quickly gained attention, but what followed were immediate reactions that demonstrated how deeply controversial his statement had become. According to Trump, the U.S.-Canada border is nothing but an artificial construct, arguing that eliminating it would be beneficial for both nations. He also pointed to the $250 billion America allegedly loses every year due to the current trade relationship between the two countries. While these comments are consistent with Trump's long-standing critique of Canada's trade policies, the timing, on the very day Canadians were casting their ballots, could not have been more inflammatory. The backlash from Canadian political leaders was swift. Conservative Party leader Pierre Poilievre condemned Trump's comments, stating firmly, "Stay out of our election." He reminded Trump that only Canadians have the right to decide their own future. Liberal leader Mark Carney echoed this sentiment, emphasizing that, "Canada decides what happens here, not anyone else." These strong responses were not only from politicians. Across the country, ordinary citizens were also quick to express their discontent, with many perceiving Trump's comments as an attempted interference in their national election. "It's not just an insult," said one voter in Toronto, "it's a slap in the face to our sovereignty. He's not even from here, and yet he thinks he can tell us how to run our country." Public outrage continued to swell as the election approached, with voters across the political spectrum rallying behind the principle that their nation's future should be determined by them, not a foreign leader. For many, Trump's taunt became a rallying cry for Canadian unity, as political parties emphasized the need to preserve the country's independence. The question now looms, was this an attempt by Trump to undermine Canada's election or simply a careless comment by a president known for his controversial rhetoric? One thing is certain, this moment of foreign interference has only amplified the national pride that many Canadians feel, and the election results may be forever marked by this external provocation. Trump's comments about Canada's potential annexation were more than just a political jab, they struck at the very heart of Canadian sovereignty. To many Canadians, their nation's independence is not just a political stance but a deep-seated part of their identity. From the Montreal Protocol to the Canada Health Act, this country has spent decades building its own systems and policies, separate from the influence of any foreign power. When Trump referred to the U.S.-Canada border as artificial, he not only disregarded Canada's geographical separation from the U.S., he also dismissed years of diplomacy, cultural exchange, and trade agreements that have built a strong, but independent, relationship between the two nations. For many Canadians, his words were a direct attack on what it means to be Canadian. The suggestion that Canada should be the 51st state was not only an economic proposal, it felt like an affront to everything they had worked hard to achieve as a sovereign nation. As Trump's comments echoed across the media, nationalism in Canada surged. The sense of unity that had quietly simmered beneath the surface for years came roaring back as citizens rallied to protect their country's autonomy. Political campaigns that emphasized Canadian independence gained new momentum, while those advocating for closer ties with the U.S. found themselves on the defensive. Nationalism, long a force in global politics, is now shaping this election in Canada. And while nationalism has been on the rise worldwide, from the Brexit referendum in the UK to the rise of populism across Europe, Trump's taunt has inadvertently amplified this sentiment in Canada. For many, it's not about left or right politics, it's about protecting their identity and rejecting foreign interference. It's about more than just trade or tariffs. It's about who we are, says Cheryl Blackwood, a voter from Vancouver. This country fought for its freedom. And now, Trump comes along and says that we should just give it up. That's not who we are. Political analysts have noted that Trump's interference has amplified existing nationalist movements within Canada. In Quebec, the idea of a sovereign, independent nation is particularly strong, yet now, even Ontario, traditionally more moderate, has seen a surge of grassroots campaigns calling for greater autonomy from both the U.S. and other global powers. Voter turnout, historically lower for some elections, has spiked as a direct result of Trump's comments. Canadians, especially in swing regions, are mobilizing at unprecedented levels, spurred by the idea that this election is no longer just about policies, it's a battle for control over their future. We can't let someone from outside our borders decide our fate, said Jean-Paul Trudeau, a political commentator. This is about sovereignty. This is about making sure Canada stays independent in every way. The Canadian media, which has long focused on domestic issues like healthcare, climate policy, and economic growth, suddenly found itself at the crossroads of international politics. Major newspapers carried headlines with bold declarations of Canada's right to decide its future, often referring to Trump's comments as an attack on Canadian democracy. But the political fallout isn't just coming from politicians, it's from the people. Citizens have taken to social media, holding rallies, and writing op-eds to express their feelings about the country's future. From university students to working-class families, the idea of a unified, independent Canada has become the rallying cry of this election. In Alberta, one of Canada's most conservative provinces, the response was particularly heated. We will decide if we want to stay independent, and we will decide how we interact with other countries, said Megan Reeds, a local activist. This is our choice. And it has to stay that way. Trump's taunt was perceived as more than just a political comment, it was a wake-up call for Canadians to stand up and assert their sovereignty. His attempt to merge the countries has only made Canadians more determined to protect the borders that define them, both physically and ideologically. Even Canadians living in the U.S. have been vocal about their desire to maintain their citizenship. Many took to social media, expressing disbelief at Trump's remarks and emphasizing their pride in being Canadian. "I'm not just a citizen of Canada, I'm a Canadian citizen," wrote one such individual on Twitter. "Trump doesn't get to decide what happens in my home country." What was once a more theoretical debate about the future of North America now has real stakes, and Canadians have made it clear that they will fight to preserve their nation's identity. The response from Canada's political leaders to Trump's inflammatory comments was swift and fierce. What had started as an offhand remark from a U.S. president quickly snowballed into an international incident, forcing Canadian politicians to respond publicly and decisively. The political fallout in Canada has been far-reaching, as Trump's taunt began to shape the national conversation about sovereignty and independence. For many Canadians, the election had already been a tight race, but Trump's interference in their democratic process only intensified the stakes. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, although not directly involved in the election campaign, found himself increasingly drawn into the discussion. The Prime Minister made his feelings clear in an impassioned speech, saying, "Canada will never be a part of anyone else's country. Our democracy is built on the principle of self-determination, and we will defend it." Trudeau's words resonated across the country, with many Canadians seeing his response as a strong reaffirmation of national pride. But it wasn't just the Liberal Party that rallied behind the idea of sovereignty. Across the political spectrum, leaders began to shift their platforms, emphasizing the need to protect Canada's identity and autonomy from foreign influence. Pierre Poilievre, leader of the Conservative Party, responded immediately, accusing Trump of meddling in Canada's internal affairs. His comment, "Stay out of our election," was echoed by other Conservative candidates who sought to frame the election as a battle for Canadian values against foreign interference. Poilievre's reaction helped solidify his stance as a protector of Canadian sovereignty, and his supporters rallied behind him in defense of the nation's independence. His campaign took on a nationalist tone, framing the election as not only about domestic policies but about the right of Canadians to make their own choices without interference. As the fallout continued, even more outspoken figures emerged within the NDP, New Democratic Party. Party leader Jagmeet Singh took to the airwaves, expressing anger over Trump's comments. He said, "This is Canada. This is our country. No one, not even the President of the United States, gets to dictate what happens here." Singh's words struck a chord with progressive voters, who saw Trump's remarks as an attack on their core values of inclusivity, fairness, and self-determination. The reaction from Liberal and NDP leaders was also strategic. They recognized that Trump's comments could be used as a tool to energize voters and galvanize support for their campaigns. In the days following Trump's post, both leaders pushed for a stronger emphasis on Canada's independence in their public speeches, citing the need for national unity. However, the political landscape became more complicated as regionalism began to play a significant role in the election fallout. In Quebec, a province known for its deep-rooted sense of nationalism and cultural pride, Trump's comments were met with fury. The Bloc Québécois, a political party focused on the protection of Quebec's unique culture and language, seized the opportunity to frame the election as a battle against foreign interference. Their slogan, "Canada for Canadians," resonated strongly with voters who felt that Quebec's distinct identity was at risk. François Legault, the Premier of Quebec, called for stronger measures to protect Quebec's interests and warned of the dangers of globalism and foreign influence. His words rallied many of Quebec's nationalist voters, who increasingly saw the issue of sovereignty as tied to Canadian unity. Meanwhile, in Western Canada, the reaction was more regional but equally intense. Alberta, known for its oil-rich economy and conservative views, became a hotspot for debate. There, voters took to town halls and rallies to express their frustration with what they perceived as Trump's disrespect for Canada's sovereignty. Alberta's Premier, Jason Kenney, echoed Poilievre's sentiments, calling Trump's interference disgraceful and urging Albertans to reject external influence. Many voters in Alberta, still struggling with the effects of recent economic shifts, found themselves more determined than ever to ensure their voice was heard. They viewed Trump's comments as a call to action, to fight for their province's future, free from outside pressure. The political landscape had shifted. What was once a typical election now felt like a referendum on Canada's independence. The growing sense of nationalism, regional pride, and resistance to foreign influence became the driving force in every campaign speech, every debate, and every discussion. Political analysts across the country noted that voter turnout was likely to increase as Canadians felt the weight of the moment. This election had morphed into more than a choice between parties, it was now about who controls Canada's future. Political analysts also began to recognize that Trump's comments had served as a catalyst for a broader conversation about the future of Canada and its place in the world. While his words may have been a blunder in his view, in Canada, they sparked a powerful wave of political action that would likely have long-lasting consequences. As Canadians went to the polls, the nationalistic fervor felt throughout the country was palpable. It was a country determined to defend its sovereignty, its identity, and its right to choose its own path. Whether this sentiment would translate into a clear victory for nationalist or pro-independence candidates remained to be seen, but one thing was certain: Trump's interference had transformed the election into a defining moment for Canada. Trump's comments have not only sparked a fierce national debate within Canada, they have also cast a long shadow over the already complex relationship between the United States and Canada. For decades, the two nations have enjoyed what is often referred to as the world's longest undefended border, maintaining close ties through trade agreements, cultural exchanges, and shared security interests. But Trump's provocative remarks about Canada becoming the 51st state have introduced a new level of tension into this long-standing partnership. The trade relationship between the U.S. and Canada has been a consistent point of contention, with Trump's America First policies targeting Canada's trade imbalances, tariffs on dairy and lumber, and accusations of unfair subsidies. But Trump's latest comment, suggesting that Canada could eliminate the border entirely and join the U.S., has crossed a line many never expected. Trade imbalances have always existed between the two countries, but Trump's approach to these issues has been marked by aggressive rhetoric. He has long criticized Canada for what he calls unfair trade practices and even accused Canada of being a freeloader in the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, later replaced by the USMCA. But now, with Trump's comments about annexation, the stakes have changed. His statement about the U.S. losing $250 billion annually due to the current trade agreement only adds fuel to the fire, making it clear that the U.S. is no longer interested in the status quo. This has left many wondering if this moment marks the beginning of an irreversible shift in U.S.-Canada relations. Canadian diplomats have remained calm in the face of these remarks, but privately, there is growing concern about the long-term implications of this crisis. According to several sources, Canadian officials are rethinking their diplomatic strategies with Washington, especially when it comes to trade negotiations, security agreements, and cross-border cooperation. Security has always been one of the strongest ties between the U.S. and Canada. The two countries share intelligence, work together on military exercises, and have one of the most robust law enforcement collaborations in the world. But Trump's America First agenda has increasingly strained these relationships, with concerns growing about mutual defense pacts and border security. Even the North American Aerospace Defense Command, NORAD, a critical binational defense program, has seen increasing pressure from the Trump administration, as the president pushes for a more aggressive approach to defense spending and security policy. Canada, historically known for its peacekeeping role, now finds itself caught between upholding its sovereignty and satisfying its largest neighbor. Diplomatic channels are also facing new scrutiny. While Canada's embassy in Washington continues to operate smoothly, sources suggest that Canadian diplomats are working overtime to reinforce the message that Canada is independent, and that any attempt to dictate its future will only backfire. Tensions between the two countries are expected to rise over the coming months, particularly if Trump's comments lead to economic retaliation or political pressure. Beyond trade and security, environmental policies and climate change initiatives also face significant uncertainty. Canada and the U.S. have historically worked together on projects like the Great Lakes Cleanup, carbon emissions reductions, and the Paris Climate Agreement. However, Trump's stance on climate change and his withdrawal from the Paris Agreement has already put a strain on cooperation. With his latest comments, questions now arise about whether the U.S. will continue to engage in multilateral environmental efforts with its neighbors, or if Canada will be forced to go it alone in pushing for climate action. For Canadian economists, the long-term effects of Trump's proposed borderless North America are far-reaching. Canada's oil industry, agriculture, and manufacturing sectors have benefited from years of access to the U.S. market, but the uncertainty surrounding trade policies and tariffs under Trump's administration could destabilize this lucrative relationship. Many business leaders in Canada have already begun exploring alternative trade routes and looking to establish stronger ties with Europe and Asia, should the U.S. further isolate itself through protectionist policies. Canada's diversified economy means it is not entirely reliant on the U.S., but Trump's comments may lead to a reconfiguration of global supply chains that will affect businesses on both sides of the border. As Canada adjusts to the political and economic repercussions of Trump's remarks, the question remains, what happens next? Will this diplomatic rift be repaired, or is the U.S. heading toward a future where Canada, once a staunch ally, is forced to reevaluate its relationship with its southern neighbor? In the coming years, Canada may find itself at a crossroads. It will need to determine whether to reinforce its sovereignty in the face of external pressure, or whether to risk a major political and economic shift toward greater independence from the United States. For now, one thing is clear, Trump's comments have done more than challenge Canada's borders, they have challenged Canada's place in the world order. After a day filled with heated rhetoric, uncertainty, and political turmoil, the results of Canada's federal election began to roll in. For many, this election was no longer just about policy, it had become a referendum on Canadian sovereignty and the right of Canadians to make their own decisions. And in the wake of Donald Trump's controversial remarks, the election outcome would prove to be a decisive statement on the country's political direction. As the ballots were counted and the results were announced, it was clear that Trump's interference had backfired. The country, united by its sense of national pride, rejected foreign influence in determining its future. Despite Trump's attempt to sway the outcome with his unsettling rhetoric, Canadians affirmed their right to self-determination, and the vote was a reaffirmation of the nation's independence. The election saw a surge in voter turnout, a testament to the fact that, while Canada may have been facing internal political challenges, the country had found a renewed sense of unity. More than ever, Canadians were determined to protect their sovereignty from external pressure, and Trump's comments served as the catalyst for this renewed national pride. Nationalist parties across the political spectrum saw gains in the wake of Trump's taunt, including the Bloc Québécois, whose strong stance on Quebec's sovereignty was reinforced. In Quebec, in particular, there was a sense of vindication, an affirmation that Canada's future belonged to Canadians, and that no foreign leader could dictate that future. The Liberal Party, led by Justin Trudeau, also saw a boost in support, as many voters chose to rally behind his defense of Canadian sovereignty in the face of Trump's interference. Trudeau's strong stance against Trump's comments resonated deeply with the Canadian public, who felt that Canada's independence was being challenged by an outsider. Even Conservative and New Democratic Party, NDP, candidates capitalized on Trump's remarks, using the rhetoric of independence to gain favor with voters who felt alienated by the U.S. president's attempt to undermine Canada's democracy. Across the country, Canadians spoke clearly and decisively. Canadians of all political affiliations came together in a collective response: "We will decide our future, not a foreign power." The result? A strong endorsement of Canadian sovereignty. Despite the external pressure, the Canadian electorate chose to remain independent, rejecting any notion that Canada should become part of the United States. While the results are clear, the question remains: what does this mean for the future of U.S.-Canada relations? The relationship between the two countries, once viewed as a model of friendly cooperation, has now entered uncharted territory. Trump's remarks have not only strained diplomatic ties, they have fundamentally shifted the dynamics of Canada's political landscape. As Canada moves forward, it is clear that the country's sense of national identity and sovereignty has been reinforced in the face of foreign interference. The national pride and unity displayed during this election will likely become a cornerstone of Canadian politics moving forward. For President Trump, this election outcome is a stinging rebuke to his attempt to undermine Canadian independence. What began as a political stunt has now become a defining moment in the history of U.S.-Canada relations, one that will likely reverberate for years to come. As Canada moves forward, the path to stronger independence has been solidified, and the country's leadership will likely continue to take a more assertive stance in its dealings with the U.S. Whether this marks the beginning of a new chapter in Canadian politics, or merely a temporary setback for Trump's ambitions, only time will tell. But one thing is certain: Trump's interference has reaffirmed Canada's resolve to stand tall on the world stage, a reminder that sovereignty is not for sale. As the dust settles and the political landscape reshapes, the future of U.S.-Canada relations remains uncertain. Will Canada continue to work closely with its neighbor to the south, or will the divide between the two countries grow wider? One thing is clear: Canada's political future is now firmly in the hands of Canadians. Thank you for joining us tonight. Stay tuned for further developments as we continue to monitor the political fallout from this extraordinary turn of events.